Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy History Channel, a place where curious minds can rest and drift gently into the mysteries of the past. Tonight, we journey into the heart of the Aztec world, a shimmering city of stone and water, built upon a lake where temples reached toward the sky and causeways stretched across the glistening surface like threads of light. Imagine the glow of fires flickering on the steps of pyramids, the sound of drums carrying across plazas, and the sight of priests in feathered cloaks, their faces painted with symbols of gods and suns. For just 2 centuries, the Aztecs built an empire of breathtaking scale, a world of floating gardens and golden markets, of sacred rituals and cosmic myths that bound Earth to heaven. Their lives were filled with poetry and music, with warriors who dressed as jaguars and eagles, and with beliefs that the sun itself rose only because of human devotion. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into history, I invite you to like and subscribe, or share your favorite Aztec wonder down in the comments. But for now, let the centuries drift away like mist over a moonlit lake, and allow the ancient city of Tenochtitlan to guide you softly toward rest. Now, if you're ready, let's begin. Their capital was a shining city built on water. When the Spanish first set eyes on Tenochtitlan, they thought it was a mirage. Rising from the middle of Lake Texcoco, it shimmered with white stone temples and long causeways stretching across the water. Boats glided silently along canals where reflections of pyramids and palaces danced in the ripples. This city, home to hundreds of thousands, seemed to float between heaven and earth. Its people had built it upon an island, expanding with earth and reeds to form an empire's heart. At night, torches flickered across the lake, and the city gleamed like a constellation brought down to earth. Even European chroniclers hardened by wars and castles admitted they had never seen anything like it. To walk into Tenochtitlan was to step into a dream made real, a place where the line between city and water blurred into something timeless and luminous. The Aztecs engineered floating gardens that still exist today. On the shallow edges of the lake, the Aztecs created fertile islands called chinampas. These floating gardens were not rafts, but carefully woven beds of reeds, layered with mud and earth until they became stable patches of land. Anchored by willow trees, they bloomed with maize, beans, squash, and flowers. From above, they looked like a checkerboard of green woven into the blue of the lake. This ingenious system fed the great city, producing abundant harvests year after year. Even today, in the canals of Xochimilco near Mexico City, descendants of these gardens still survive, drifting softly on the water like echoes of a vanished world. The chinampas were more than farming. They were proof that the Aztecs could take a marshy lake and turn it into the foundation of a thriving empire. A landscape that seemed impossible became, through their hands, a place of endless life. Tenochtitlan was larger and cleaner than most European cities. At its height, Tenochtitlan held perhaps 250,000 people, more than London, Paris, or Rome at the same time. Its broad avenues were swept daily, its canals kept flowing with fresh water, and its markets overflowed with food, textiles, and exotic goods. Visitors marveled at the cleanliness, noting that people bathed frequently, sometimes every day, in the lake or in household baths. Refuse was collected, sorted, and even reused as fertilizer on the chinampas. Compared to the crowded, narrow, and often filthy streets of Europe, this city seemed otherworldly in its order. The sheer scale was staggering. Temples rising in the distance, gardens blooming within the walls, and plazas large enough to hold tens of thousands. To step into Tenochtitlan was not just to enter a city, it was to encounter a vision of urban life far ahead of its time. They built aqueducts, causeways, and sewers in a swamp. Building on a lake might have seemed like madness. Yet the Aztecs mastered it with engineering that astonished even their enemies. Stone causeways, wide enough for armies, stretched across the waters, connecting the island capital to the mainland. A double aqueduct brought fresh water from springs miles away, flowing across arches and channels into the heart of the city. Sewers and drainage systems carried waste away, keeping the streets clean. Bridges could be lifted to block invaders, turning the city into a fortress. All of this was accomplished without iron tools or wheeled vehicles, only with stone, wood, and human labor. What should have been a marshland was transformed into one of the most advanced cities of the pre-modern world. To the Aztecs, it was not an obstacle, but an opportunity, a chance to raise their empire on water, as if it floated upon the lake itself, their great temple aligned with the rising sun. At the very heart of Tenochtitlan stood the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple. Two steep stairways climbed side by side toward twin shrines at its summit, one for Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun and war, and one for Tlaloc, god of rain and fertility. Each morning, as the sun rose, its light aligned with the temple's structure, illuminating the shrines in a golden glow. To the Aztecs, this was no coincidence but cosmic harmony, proof that their sacred city was aligned with the order of the heavens. From the base, the temple loomed like a mountain, its painted surface gleaming red, blue, and white. From the summit, priests looked down upon the city, the lake stretching endlessly beyond. The Templo Mayor was not merely stone, it was the axis of the world, the point where sky, earth, and underworld met in ritual and sacrifice. They lit the world anew with the new fire ceremony. Every 52 years, as their calendar cycles aligned, the Aztecs feared the universe might end. To prevent this, they performed the new fire ceremony, a ritual to renew the world itself. All fires across the empire were extinguished, plunging homes and temples into silence and darkness. People destroyed old belongings, fasting and waiting in anxious quiet. Then, upon a hill outside the city, priests kindled a single sacred flame in the chest of a sacrificial victim. From that flame, torches were lit and carried back through the night to relight every hearth. With the return of fire, relief swept through the people, the sun would rise, the world would continue, and life would begin again. It was a ritual of fear and renewal, of cosmic fragility and of hope, a reminder that even the universe itself depended upon human devotion. The Aztecs believed the sun needed human hearts to rise. To the Aztecs, the sun was not eternal. It was a fragile, struggling force that required nourishment. Without offerings, it would falter and the world would plunge into darkness. The nourishment it craved was the energy of human hearts offered through sacrifice upon the temple. When blood flowed, they believed it strengthened the sun for another day's journey across the sky. This belief was not cruelty in their eyes, but reciprocity. Humans gave life back to the universe that sustained them. The rising of the dawn was not taken for granted. Each daybreak was seen as the result of sacred duty, the balance of life and death. To us, the sun is a blazing ball of plasma. To the Aztecs, it was something far more delicate, a living being whose survival depended upon their faith and their offerings. They saw themselves living in the fifth age of the world. Aztec myths told of 4 previous worlds, or suns, each destroyed in cataclysm. One ended in wind, another in fire, another in floods, and one in the hunger of jaguars. They believed they now lived in the 5th sun, a fragile age destined also to end one day. This gave their rituals urgency. Sacrifice was not only about worship, but about delaying the inevitable. Each ceremony was an attempt to sustain this 5th creation. to hold off collapse a little longer. To walk through Tenochtitlan was to walk with an awareness of living on borrowed time, of inhabiting an age that might vanish at any moment. Their myths were not just stories but cosmic warnings, reminders that the world's survival was never certain. For the Aztecs, life was a balance upon the edge of time, held steady by devotion, blood, and the will of the gods. Their priests wore skins and feathers to become living gods. During rituals, Aztec priests transformed themselves into embodiments of the divine. They donned elaborate costumes of feathers, jaguar skins, and painted masks. Some wore flayed skins from sacrificial victims, symbolizing rebirth and renewal. In these disguises, they were no longer merely human. They were gods walking among mortals, their actions carrying cosmic weight. Drums thundered, dancers circled, and smoke of incense curled into the sky. To onlookers, the priests' movements were not performance, but sacred embodiment, living myths enacted in real time. The boundaries between mortal and divine blurred. Even their speech became ritualized, their words echoing as commands of the gods themselves. This was the power of Aztec ritual. It was not only seen, but believed, a drama in which human beings stepped into the roles of immortals, keeping the universe alive through their very presence and their blood. They sacrificed captives, so the cosmos would not collapse. Atop the temples, under the rising sun, sacrifices were performed not as acts of cruelty, but of cosmic responsibility. Captives taken in war were offered to the gods, their hearts raised skyward as the drums thundered and crowds chanted. In Aztec belief, these offerings were not killings, but gifts, exchanges that fed the universe itself. Without them, the cosmos might crumble, the sun might die, and life would end. The victims, often warriors, were seen as honored participants in a divine cycle, chosen to sustain creation. To the outside world, it seemed brutal. But to the Aztecs, it was necessary devotion, the price of existence itself. In their eyes, each sacrifice was an act that renewed the universe for all. What looks to us like destruction was, to them, the ultimate form of preservation, keeping the fragile balance of the fifth sun alive. Their calendar predicted ages of creation and destruction. The Aztec calendar was more than a way to mark days. It was a window into cosmic cycles. They believed time moved in great ages, each destined to end in catastrophe. The familiar circular sunstone wasn't a clock but a vision of these ages. Jaguars devouring humankind, floods sweeping away the world, fire raining from the sky. At its center sat the sun god, his tongue a sacrificial blade, demanding the nourishment of blood. Around him, glyphs marked the passing of sacred days, the turning of cosmic wheels. Priests studied this calendar with grave precision, knowing that the fate of the universe lay written in its cycles. To the Aztecs, it was not the slow ticking of time, but the heartbeat of creation itself, fragile, urgent, and always edging toward its next collapse. Each day carried weight. Each festival held the power to steady or to unravel existence. The Aztec year had 18 ceremonial festivals. Unlike the 12 months we know, the Aztecs divided their year into 18 parts, each tied to a festival honoring particular gods. These celebrations were far from quiet affairs. They filled plazas with music, dance, processions, and offerings, sometimes lasting for days. One festival was dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain god, where children were sacrificed so their tears would call down storms. Another honored Zipe Totec, the god of renewal, with priests donning flayed skins to symbolize life reborn. Others were filled with flowers, with games, with feasting, and with solemn rituals of fire and smoke. Through these festivals, The rhythm of the year was not measured by numbers on a page, but by the pulse of devotion, sacrifice, and joy. Every few weeks, the empire renewed its connection with the divine, weaving everyday life into the grand cosmic story of gods and creation. Entire wars were fought to capture prisoners for sacrifice. The Aztecs waged a peculiar kind of war known as the Flower Wars. Unlike campaigns for conquest or land, these battles were arranged between rival states with one purpose: to capture warriors alive. To kill on the battlefield was less honorable than to seize an enemy and bring him back for sacrifice. Armies would clash with ferocity, but when an enemy was subdued, he was bound rather than slain. For the captor, such a prize brought prestige for the captive. It was often seen as destiny, a role in sustaining the universe. These flower wars were both ritual and reality, real bloodshed fought for cosmic purpose. The name itself, flowers, hinted at how sacrifice was understood, not as destruction, but as offering, as beauty given to the gods. For the Aztecs, the battlefield was another temple, and war itself became a ritual of cosmic balance. They feared the sun might one day refuse to rise. Each dawn was a miracle to the Aztecs, but also a moment of dread. They lived with the belief that the sun was fragile, that it required constant offerings to keep moving across the sky. Without the nourishment of sacrifice, the great fire in the heavens might falter, leaving the world in eternal darkness. This fear was woven into daily life. Rituals were not occasional but constant, from small offerings of blood to grand ceremonies upon temple summits. People woke with gratitude for the rising light, but also with the knowledge that its return was never guaranteed. Every morning carried the echo of uncertainty. Would the sun climb again tomorrow? It gave life a sense of urgency, of duty. To sustain the dawn was to sustain existence itself. In their eyes, the continuation of the cosmos depended not on chance, but on human devotion and sacrifice. Warriors who died in battle followed the sun across the sky. For Aztec warriors, death was not an end, but a transformation. Those who died in combat or on the sacrificial stone were believed to join the sun in its daily journey. At dawn, they accompanied it rising from the east, radiant and strong. By noon, they soared with it overhead, shining in glory. By sunset, they disappeared into the west, only to be reborn again at morning. In this way, warriors became eternal companions of the sun god Huitzilopochtli, their bravery rewarded with immortality. To fight, then, was not merely for empire or conquest, it was to earn a place in the sky. This vision infused Aztec warfare with spiritual meaning. The battlefield was both dangerous and sacred, each strike of a weapon echoing far beyond mortal life. For the Aztecs, courage was not lost to death, but carried forever on the golden path of the sun. Women who died in childbirth were honored like soldiers. To the Aztecs, childbirth was a battlefield, and the woman in labor was a warrior. The struggle to bring forth new life was seen as equal in bravery to the clash of weapons. When a woman died in childbirth, she was believed to follow the same path as fallen soldiers, joining the sun on its journey across the sky. She was honored as a heroine, her spirit powerful and dangerous, capable of aiding or harming the living. Families held rituals to respect these women, knowing they had given their lives for the survival of the community. This belief elevated motherhood into a sacred duty, one that carried risks as great as combat and rewards as eternal as the warriors. To die in childbirth was not seen as tragedy alone, but as transformation, a joining of the cosmic cycle, a warrior's death in the service of life. Dogs were buried with people to guide their souls. When an Aztec passed into death, they often did not go alone. Dogs, especially the hairless Sulojtskjuintli, were buried with their owners or offered in ritual, destined to serve as guides in the afterlife. The soul of the dog was believed to help the human spirit cross the treacherous river that marked the entrance to Mictlan, the underworld. Without such a companion, the journey could be perilous, the soul lost in darkness. The Zolo was not just a pet, but a sacred companion, its smooth body thought to carry warmth and healing, even in life. In death, it became a ferryman, leading its human across waters that no one could cross alone. To the Aztecs, the bond between person and animal did not end at the grave. It continued in the deepest shadows of the afterlife, where loyal paws guided souls safely home. The underworld was a 9-level journey called Mictlan. For most people, the afterlife did not mean paradise. Instead, souls embarked on a long, arduous journey through Mictlan, the underworld. This realm stretched across 9 levels, each filled with trials, mountains crashing together, icy winds, rivers of blood, jaguars waiting in darkness. Guided by dogs, the souls of the dead traveled for 4 years through these realms, shedding burdens and facing hardships, until at last they reached stillness at the underworld's heart. It was not punishment, but completion, a return to balance. Only warriors, sacrificed captives, and women who died in childbirth escaped this path, joining the sun instead. For everyone else, Mictlan was the destination, a shadowed land both feared and accepted. It reminded the living that life was fleeting, and that endurance, not escape, was the mark of the soul. The journey itself was the final act of existence. They believed bloodletting fed the gods directly. Not all offerings to the gods involved sacrifice of others. Aztecs often gave their own blood, drawn with thorns, bone, or obsidian blades. Priests pierced their ears, lips, or tongues, letting drops fall onto paper that was then burned as sacred smoke. Even nobles and rulers participated, offering their lifeblood as a sign of devotion. To the Aztecs, blood was not mere fluid, but a concentrated form of life energy, a spark of divine essence within the body. By releasing it, they fed the gods directly, strengthening the bonds between heaven and earth. This practice connected everyday people to the cosmic cycle, showing that sacrifice was not only about captives or ritual victims. It was also about personal devotion, about giving a part of oneself to sustain the universe. The smallest drop of blood, in their eyes, could carry the weight of a prayer. Some sacrifices were symbolic, using flowers instead of blood. Though famous for human offerings, the Aztecs also gave gentler gifts. Flowers, with their beauty and fleeting life, were seen as sacred symbols. In some rituals, instead of blood, priests and worshippers offered garlands, petals, or woven crowns of blossoms. These flower sacrifices carried the essence of transience, a recognition that life itself blooms brightly and then fades. To the gods, such offerings were no less meaningful, for they represented purity, devotion, and the natural cycle of growth and decay. Aztec poetry often spoke of life as a flower, brief yet radiant, and to scatter petals upon the temple steps was to give back that beauty to the divine. These symbolic acts balanced the harsher rituals, showing that Aztec religion was not only about fear and death, but also about reverence for life's delicate, fragrant moments, offerings as ephemeral as dawn itself. The Aztecs wore brilliant headdresses of quetzal feathers. Among the Aztecs, feathers were more precious than gold. The most treasured came from the quetzal, a bird with shimmering emerald plumage and long, flowing tail feathers that caught the light like strands of sunlight itself. These feathers were gathered from distant tropical lands, brought to Tenochtitlan through long networks of trade. Rulers and priests wore towering headdresses made from them, bright with scarlet macaw feathers, blue cotinga plumage, and the green glow of the quetzal. Each piece was a living rainbow, an offering of beauty drawn from the natural world. To wear such a headdress was to shine with divine radiance, to embody the brilliance of the gods. When the Spanish saw them, they were astonished by the craftsmanship, declaring them more wondrous than jewels. For the Aztecs, they were not decoration but sacred symbols, a reminder that power, like a feather, was both dazzling and delicate. Their warriors became jaguars and eagles in ritual and dress. Aztec warriors did not merely fight, they transformed. The most elite belonged to two powerful orders, the eagle warriors and the jaguar warriors. Dressed in feathered suits and helmets shaped like open beaks, eagle warriors embodied the rising sun, fierce and watchful. Jaguar warriors cloaked themselves in spotted pelts, their helmets carved with snarling jaws, channeling the strength and stealth of the jungle cat. On the battlefield, these warriors were not seen as men, but as living manifestations of animals, symbols of cosmic forces at play. Their appearance alone struck fear into enemies, dazzling them with colors, feathers, and snarls. Capturing prisoners was their highest goal, and their bravery was measured not just in kills, but in how many foes they brought home alive. In the Aztec imagination, these warriors were more than soldiers. They were embodiments of the natural and divine powers that sustained the universe. Capturing enemies alive was the mark of true bravery. Unlike many armies that sought to destroy, the Aztecs fought to capture. A warrior's worth was judged not by how many enemies he killed, but by how many he could take alive. Captives became offerings to the gods, ensuring the sun's survival and the empire's glory. On the battlefield, this meant closing in with obsidian-bladed clubs designed not only to wound, but to disable. The moment of capture was a triumph, both personal and cosmic. Warriors who secured many captives earned prestige, rising through the ranks to become eagles or jaguars. For the Aztecs, bravery was measured in restraint and skill, the ability to defeat without killing, to claim victory that served a higher purpose. To us, it seems paradoxical. To them, it was the essence of valor, conquering not for destruction, but to sustain the delicate balance of the cosmos. Elite merchants traveled far and acted as spies. The Aztec merchants, known as Pochteka, were more than traders. They journeyed far beyond the empire, carrying cacao, jade, cotton, and feathers, reaching lands as distant as Central America. Moving in caravans, they brought back goods too rare or exotic to be found at home. Yet their role was not only commercial. These merchants also served as the empire's eyes and ears, gathering intelligence about foreign kingdoms, noting their wealth, defenses, and alliances. In this way, trade became a tool of diplomacy and of conquest. The Pochteka lived in their own districts, bound by strict codes of secrecy and loyalty. Their work was dangerous, but their status was high, for they were both lifeblood of the economy and agents of the empire's expansion. Every feathered cloak or carved gemstone that reached Tenochtitlan carried with it not only wealth, but whispered knowledge of distant peoples and lands. The Tlatelolco market bustled with tens of thousands daily. Imagine a marketplace so vast and organized that it could host over 20,000 people each day. This was Tlatelolco, the great market of the Aztec capital. Spanish accounts describe endless rows of goods, shimmering textiles, glistening obsidian blades, fresh vegetables, birds in cages, and fragrant flowers. There were sections for everything, from food and pottery to jewelry and tools. Officials oversaw trade, ensuring fair prices and punishing cheats. Bartering was common, but cacao beans often served as currency. The market was not chaos, but a humming order, alive with voices, color, and music. To a visitor, it must have seemed overwhelming, a place where the wealth of an empire flowed together. Even hardened conquistadors marveled, saying no European city could rival its scale. The Tlatelolco market was more than commerce. It was the heartbeat of daily life, a living showcase of the Aztec world in motion. Cocoa beans were spent like coins. In the Aztec world, small brown seeds held immense value. Cocoa beans harvested from tropical trees were so prized that they became currency. A rabbit might cost a handful, while a turkey could be worth hundreds. Skilled forgeries even existed, with empty shells filled with dirt passed off as payment. Yet cacao was more than money, it was also sacred. From these beans, the Aztecs made a bitter, spiced drink flavored with chili, honey, or vanilla, consumed by nobles, warriors, and priests. Common people rarely tasted it, for to drink cacao was to partake in the luxury of the divine. The dual role of the bean, as wealth and as nourishment, made it central to both economy and ritual. In every pouch of seeds rattled the essence of Aztec life: trade, sustenance, devotion, and the subtle reminder that value is what a people believe it to be. Chocolate was first enjoyed by Aztec nobles and priests. Long before it became sweetened into the treat we know today, chocolate was a sacred drink of the Aztecs. Made from ground cacao beans mixed with water, chili peppers, and sometimes honey or vanilla. It was thick, bitter, and invigorating. Nobles sipped it from painted cups, priests consumed it in ritual, and warriors drank it before battle for strength. Its frothy surface, achieved by pouring it between vessels, was considered the height of refinement. To the Aztecs, chocolate was not mere refreshment, it was a substance of power, tied to the gods and to the life of the elite. Commoners rarely tasted it, but its presence in ceremony linked it to cosmic order. When the Spanish carried it across the sea, it began its long transformation into the sweet confection we know. Yet in its Aztec form, chocolate was not candy, it was a sacred essence. They made drinks from agave, maize, and cacao. The Aztec world was rich with unusual beverages. Fermented sap from the agave plant produced pulque, a milky, intoxicating drink consumed in rituals and festivals. From maize, they brewed atole, a warm, thickened drink flavored with chili or honey. And from cacao, they crafted the famous spiced chocolate, foamy and bitter, reserved for elites. Each drink carried meaning beyond taste. Pulque was tied to the gods of fertility and renewal. Atole sustained farmers in the fields, nourishing body and spirit. Chocolate gave energy and was linked to nobility and the divine. Drinking in the Aztec world was never just about thirst. It was about communion with the land, with the gods, and with the rhythms of daily life. Each sip was a reminder that what sustained the body also bound it to the cosmos, transforming nourishment into sacred ritual. They ate insects, frogs, and salamanders with chili and maize. The Aztec diet was adventurous by modern standards. Alongside staples of maize, beans, and squash, they relished a wide variety of protein sources drawn from the lakes and land. Grasshoppers toasted with chili, water boatman eggs fried like caviar, frogs simmered in stews, and salamanders roasted over fire all featured on their tables. Ant larvae were a delicacy, crunchy and rich. These foods were not seen as strange, but as part of a balanced diet, supplemented by turkey, fish, and a hairless Soloid dog. Spiced with chili peppers, wrapped in tortillas, or blended into sauces, these dishes were flavorful, nutritious, and resourceful. Insects, abundant and high in protein, sustained both commoners and nobles. Today, many of these traditions endure in Mexican cuisine. What may seem unusual to us was, for the Aztecs, a celebration of the richness of their environment and its endless sources of sustenance. Maize was more than food. It was a sacred gift. Corn, or maize, was the foundation of Aztec life. It grew in their fields, filled their tortillas and tamales, and nourished their people. But maize was more than a crop. It was divine. Myths told that humans themselves were fashioned from maize dough, given breath by the gods. To eat it was to partake in the substance of creation itself. Farmers honored it with rituals, planting and harvesting in tune with festivals. Different colors of maize, yellow, white, red, blue, each carried symbolic meaning. In every meal, in every handful of kernels, the Aztecs saw not only sustenance but a sacred connection. The cycle of planting, growing, and harvesting reflected the cycle of life itself. To the Aztecs, maize was both body and spirit, gift and duty. Without it, there was no life, no people, no world. It was the very essence of existence. The Aztecs domesticated a strange hairless dog, the Xoloitzcuintli. Among the Aztecs lived a breed of dog unlike any other, the Xoloitzcuintli, often called simply the Xolo. Nearly hairless, with warm skin and gentle eyes, these dogs were considered sacred. They were companions in life, often curled beside hearths or carried by travelers, but their importance stretched into death. Many were sacrificed or buried with their owners, believed to guide souls across the dangerous river that led into Mictlan, the underworld. Their warmth was thought to heal illness, their presence a comfort to both body and spirit. Even their name survives in modern Mexico, where Xolos are still bred today. For the Aztecs, they were not just animals, they were bridges between worlds, guardians of life and death. To look into the eyes of a Xolo was to glimpse loyalty made sacred, a bond destined to outlast even the boundaries of the grave. Their diet was plant-based, long before it was trendy. Though they consumed turkey, fish, and the occasional dog, most Aztec meals were centered on plants. Maize formed the backbone of their diet, accompanied by beans, squash, and chilies. This trio, known as the Three Sisters, provided complete nutrition, carbohydrates, protein, and vital vitamins. Amaranth, chia, and tomatoes added variety, while cactus pads and fruits were common on the table. The abundance of vegetables, grains, and seeds meant that meat was less common, often reserved for feasts or ceremonies. In modern terms, the Aztec diet was strikingly plant-based, balanced, and healthy, fueling a vast population without over-reliance on livestock. Meals were simple but nourishing. Tortillas hot from the griddle, beans stewed with chili, tamales wrapped in maize husks. To eat like an Aztec was to eat in rhythm with the land, drawing strength from plants that had been carefully cultivated for centuries under the sun. They knew hundreds of herbal medicines. Aztec healers worked not only with ritual, but with deep botanical knowledge. Hundreds of plants were catalogued for their healing properties, many of which modern science has confirmed. Aloe was used for burns, willow bark for pain, and herbs like passion flower to calm the heart and mind. Flowers, roots, and resins were carefully prepared in infusions, salves, and powders. Some were used to treat coughs, others for stomach ailments, and many to purify wounds. Healers were trained in the use of these remedies, often working alongside midwives and priests. Healing, for the Aztecs, was never purely physical. It was spiritual, woven into prayer, offerings, and the balance of the body with the cosmos. When a patient drank a bitter herbal tea, they were not only swallowing medicine, but aligning themselves once more with the natural forces that sustained life. Their healers could set bones and perform surgery, Medicine in the Aztec world was not limited to herbs. Skilled practitioners knew how to reset broken bones, using splints and bindings to allow healing. They drained abscesses, stitched wounds with fibers, and sometimes even performed trepanation, a surgical opening of the skull. Their instruments were simple: obsidian blades sharper than steel, bone needles, and woven bandages, yet they worked with surprising effectiveness. Records describe cauterizing wounds with hot stones and applying resin to seal injuries. These techniques reveal a level of medical understanding that rivals practices in other great civilizations. Healing was practical and spiritual together. Surgeons called upon gods while they worked, believing that success depended on both skill and divine favor. To lie in the care of an Aztec healer was to place oneself in the hands of someone who saw no division between science and faith, body and spirit, cure and prayer. Midwives held the status of priests. In the Aztec world, midwives were revered figures, standing at the boundary of life and death. Their role in childbirth was considered sacred, equal in importance to priests at the temples. They guided mothers through labor with chants, prayers, and ritual invocations, calling upon the gods for strength. If complications arose, their decisions could determine whether mother or child survived. Should a woman die in childbirth, the midwife oversaw her passage into the afterlife, treating her with the honor reserved for warriors. Midwives also advised women throughout pregnancy, teaching rituals of purification and protection. Their knowledge of herbs and practices made them healers as well as guides. They were voices of both comfort and power, respected for their closeness to the mysteries of creation. In their hands, the act of birth became more than biological. It was a cosmic event, a renewal of the world itself. Dreams were read as messages from the gods. Sleep, for the Aztecs, was a place of communication. Dreams were thought to carry messages from the gods, omens that could shape decisions in waking life. A dream of water might signify fertility, or floods one of fire might warn of conflict. Priests skilled in dream interpretation studied these signs with care, guiding leaders on whether to go to war, when to plant crops, or how to respond to portents. Ordinary people, too, paid close attention to their visions, seeing them as reflections of their spiritual balance. In this way, the night was never silent. It was filled with whispers from beyond, a theater of symbols where gods, ancestors, and forces of fate spoke through images. To wake from a dream in Aztec times was to wake with meaning, carrying a piece of divine conversation into the dawn. Astrology guided everything from birth to war. The Aztec calendar was not only about days and months, it was also a map of destiny. Each day carried its own sign, tied to gods, animals, and cosmic forces. A child born under one sign might be destined for greatness, while another might face hardship. Priests studied these signs to advise families, interpreting the alignment of days and cycles as guides for the future. Even rulers consulted astrologers before declaring war or undertaking great projects, believing the stars and cycles revealed the god's will. For the Aztecs, the heavens were not distant. They were interwoven with every human action. To act without consulting the calendar was to risk going against the flow of the universe itself. Their astrology was a reminder that fate, choice, and the divine were always entangled, and that every decision, large or small, rippled across the cosmic order. Some Aztec poems still echo across centuries. Though much was lost in conquest, fragments of Aztec poetry survive, carried through time by memory and record. These verses speak not of conquest alone, but of beauty, sorrow, and reflection. Poets wrote of flowers blooming briefly, of life's transience, of the fleeting nature of joy. One noble poet, Nezahualcóyotl, left lines that still stir the heart. Laments for the impermanence of life, questions about what remains when all else fades. Poetry was not a pastime but a sacred art, performed aloud with music, binding communities in reflection. To hear these verses was to hear the voice of a people who saw themselves caught between the eternal and the fragile. Even centuries later, their words still carry, like petals drifting across time, reminders that though empires fall, the human longing for beauty and meaning endures. Music was considered a divine language. In Aztec life, music was more than entertainment. It was a language that spoke directly to the gods. Drums boomed like thunder during ceremonies, flutes sang in high, piercing tones, and conch-shell trumpets called across plazas. Music accompanied every ritual, from sacrifices to harvest festivals, weaving human sound into cosmic rhythm. Children were taught to sing and play instruments, for music was seen as both skill and devotion. Some melodies were gentle, echoing like wind over water, while others were fierce, driving dancers into trances beneath the temple steps. To play music was to join creation itself, to align human breath and beat with the great pulse of the universe. In the Aztec imagination, silence belonged to death. Music, vibrant and alive, was proof of life, joy, and faith, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. Their ritual dramas were performed as sacred theater. The Aztecs told their myths not only in words, but in living theater. Ritual dramas brought gods and heroes to life through costumes, masks, music, and dance. Priests and actors embodied deities wearing feathers, jewels, and painted skins, moving through plazas as if myths themselves had stepped into the world. These performances were not entertainment, but worship, retelling the stories of creation, sacrifice, and renewal. Audiences watched not passively but as participants, knowing the drama's renewed cosmic cycles and bound the community together. Through theatre, history, and myth became one, and the people saw themselves reflected in the divine struggles upon the stage. The rituals were both art and prayer, a reminder that human life itself was a performance in the great theatre of the universe. In every gesture, every costume, the Aztecs reenacted the eternal drama of gods and creation. Their writing used pictures instead of letters. The Aztecs wrote in images. Instead of letters and alphabetic words, they used painted symbols, each standing for an idea, a sound, or an entire story. A footprint meant movement or travel. A flame could mean speech. A jaguar might stand for the animal itself, or for the day associated with it on the calendar. In this way, they recorded tribute, myths, and history in bright colors on paper made from bark or deerskin. Their writing was not meant to be read silently in private. It was performed. A scribe or priest would read the images aloud, weaving them into story and song. To hold an Aztec manuscript was to hold a living tale, one that required voice, memory, and imagination to bring it to life. It was a script for performance, a bridge between symbol and sound, and a reminder that words need not be letters to endure. Painted codices recorded tribute, wars, and myths. The Aztecs created painted books called codices, long sheets of bark paper folded into screen-like volumes, or deerskin painted with vivid pigments. On their pages were images of battles, lists of tribute, and the faces of gods and kings. They served as records of empire, detailing how much maize or cloth each city owed, or recounting great victories on the battlefield. They also carried myths, the journeys of gods, the creation of the world, the cycles of time. To look at a codex was to see history and cosmology bound together, a visual record of life and faith. Many were burned during conquest, yet a few survived, their colors still bright even centuries later. Today, they offer us glimpses into the Aztec mind, a world where memory, story, and duty were painted side by side, each symbol a key to understanding a vanished empire. Only priests and nobles could truly read them. Though Aztec writing was visual, its full meaning was not simple to grasp. Priests and nobles were trained to understand the complex symbols, the way one image could carry layers of meaning. A jaguar might not just be an animal, but also a calendar sign, a lineage emblem, or a symbol of divine power. For coloners, the painted pages were dazzling but opaque, requiring a guide to interpret them. This restriction gave priests and nobles great power, for they controlled the records of tribute, the myths of creation, and the omens of the calendar. Reading was not a common skill, but a sacred one. To read in Aztec society was not just literacy, it was to decode the very language of the gods, a privilege that bound together knowledge, authority, and divine favor in the hands of the few. Education was mandatory for all children. Unlike many ancient civilizations, the Aztecs required every child to attend school, no matter their status. Boys and girls, rich and poor alike, were sent to institutions where they learned discipline, tradition, and the skills needed for their place in society. Attendance was not optional. Parents who neglected to send their children could be punished. This emphasis on universal education ensured that the empire's customs, religion, and knowledge passed faithfully from one generation to the next. Children were taught not only practical skills, but also respect for authority, endurance in hardship, and devotion to the gods. To the Aztecs, education was not only about learning to work or fight, it was about shaping character, ensuring that each person contributed to the cosmic balance of society. In their world, knowledge was as vital as food, sustaining the empire just as maize sustained the body. Boys and girls were taught in different schools. The Aztecs valued education, but they also divided it by gender. Boys and girls were taught in different schools, reflecting the roles expected of them in society. Boys might attend the Tenochtitlan, where they learned farming, warfare, and crafts, or the Comicac, reserved for noble sons, where they studied history, religion, and leadership. Girls were taught skills of weaving, cooking, and household management, but also rituals and songs that honored the gods. Though the subject differed, both genders received moral training, lessons in humility, hard work, and devotion. Teachers emphasized discipline, often with strict punishments for laziness or disrespect. This division reflected the Aztec belief in a balanced world. Men and women had different duties, yet both were sacred, both necessary. By shaping children in separate paths, the Aztecs ensured that every part of society flowed toward its proper role in the great cosmic order. Nobles studied philosophy, history, and statecraft. For the sons of nobles, education reached beyond daily survival. In the Comicac schools, they studied the intricacies of history, philosophy, and governance. They memorized long poems and prayers, learned to interpret the calendar, and studied the rituals that bound the empire to the gods. They were trained in oratory, taught to speak with grace and authority, for their voices might one day lead councils or ceremonies. Lessons were demanding, discipline strict, but the reward was influence and leadership. From these schools came priests, judges, generals, and rulers. Their education was not only about knowledge, but about cultivating the wisdom and restraint expected of leaders. To be born noble was to inherit responsibility, and the Comicac shaped young minds into the keepers of empire. In every lesson, they were reminded that power was not personal, it was a duty owed to gods and people alike. Commoners learned farming, craft, and war. Children of common families attended the Tenochtitlan, the House of Youth. Here, boys were trained in farming, crafts, and above all, warfare. They carried loads of wood to build endurance, learned the use of weapons, and prepared to fight in the empire's campaigns. Girls, often taught at home, mastered weaving, cooking, and other household duties that sustained daily life. Education was practical, but it also carried moral weight. Teachers stressed humility, obedience, and service to the community. Even the smallest tasks were tied to cosmic duty. To grow maize was to feed not only people, but also the gods who had created humanity from maize dough. Through discipline and labor, commoners were shaped into the backbone of Aztec society. Their education reminded them that every life, no matter its status, played a role in sustaining both empire and cosmos. They raised children strictly, teaching discipline from birth. Aztec parenting was firm, sometimes severe, shaped by the belief that discipline created strength. Children were expected to rise early, work hard, and show respect. Laziness was punished, and disobedience could bring harsh lessons, from pricking with thorns to holding a child over smoke as correction. But these practices were not cruelty for its own sake. Parents believed they prepared children for the hardships of life, teaching endurance and humility. Songs and sayings warned against pride or idleness, praising modesty and labor. Yet alongside the sternness came guidance. Parents told stories, taught songs, and passed on the rituals that wove each child into the fabric of their community. Childhood was not a time of indulgence, but of preparation. In the Aztec world, to grow up was to be shaped like maize in the field, cultivated carefully, tended strictly, and made ready to nourish the world. Marriage was a sacred ritual of binding cloaks. When two Aztecs were wed, their union was celebrated in a ritual rich with symbolism. Families gathered as priests invoked the gods, and the bride and groom were bound together by the corners of their cloaks, a gesture that signified their joining. Offerings were made, food and drink shared, and songs sung to bless the new couple. Marriage was more than personal choice. It was a sacred bond tied to family, community, and the gods. Nobles often arranged marriages to secure alliances, while commoners sought partners through family ties or matchmakers. Divorce was possible, but marriage itself was honored as the proper order of life. It was seen as the foundation of household and society alike. To be bound in marriage was to step into a partnership not just with one another, but with the cosmic balance that governed all existence. Polygamy was common for nobles and rulers. While commoners typically had one spouse, Aztec nobles and rulers often practiced polygamy, taking multiple wives. These marriages were not merely personal unions, but instruments of politics, binding families together through kinship ties. A nobleman might marry daughters of allies or conquered rulers, strengthening loyalty and spreading influence. Each wife held her own household responsibilities, and children from these unions expanded a noble's lineage and legacy. Yet even in polygamy, marriage retained its sacred meaning. Each union was blessed through ritual, each wife honored in ceremony. For rulers especially, marriage was part of statecraft, weaving together the many peoples under Aztec control. In this way, love, duty, and politics converged in the household. To us, it may seem unusual. To the Aztecs, it was natural, another way to balance the needs of family, society, and empire in the grand design of the world. Laws regulated clothing, jewelry, and fabrics. In Aztec society, clothing was more than fashion. It was law. Strict regulations determined what each class could wear, ensuring that status was visible at a glance. Nobles were permitted elaborate cloaks, rich dyes, and fine embroidery. Warriors who captured many prisoners earned the right to adorn themselves with feathers or jaguar pelts. Commoners, however, were forbidden from wearing certain fabrics or bright ornaments. Even sandals were restricted. Ordinary people went barefoot, while those of high rank could wear them as symbols of privilege. Jewelry, too, was carefully controlled, with jade and turquoise reserved for the elite. These laws created a visual order, binding society together in a tapestry of ranks and roles. To break them was not a small offense, but a disruption of balance, punishable by fines or worse. Through clothing, the Aztecs displayed not only beauty, but the very structure of their world. Only nobles could wear cotton. Cotton, soft and cool, was considered a luxury fabric in the Aztec Empire. Commoners were forbidden to wear it, restricted instead to garments of maguey fiber, rougher, heavier, and less comfortable. Cotton was a privilege reserved for nobles, warriors, and rulers, marking them instantly by texture and appearance. Cloaks of white cotton or richly dyed and embroidered garments signaled wealth and rank, shimmering in markets and ceremonies. To receive cotton clothing as a gift was an honor, a recognition of service or loyalty. This restriction reflected more than fashion. It underscored the sharp divides of Aztec society, where even the feel of fabric against the skin was a reminder of one's place in the cosmic order. For nobles, cotton was comfort and status. For commoners, it was a symbol seen but rarely touched, a fabric woven with the authority of law and tradition. Slaves could buy back their freedom. Slavery existed in Aztec society, but it differed from the hereditary bondage common in other civilizations. A slave's children were born free, and a slave could regain freedom through payment, loyal service, or even escape to the royal palace, where protections were offered. People might enter slavery to pay off debts or as punishment for crimes, but the condition was not always permanent. Many slaves lived in households, working fields, or serving in trade. Some rose to positions of trust, managing affairs or traveling with merchants. The possibility of freedom gave slavery in the Aztec world a fluid quality, more entwined with economy and justice than with absolute ownership. Though still harsh and demanding, it carried the idea that servitude was not destiny but circumstance, one that could be changed through effort, chance, or the favor of the gods. Farmers could lose land, but never their homes. Land was the foundation of Aztec society, worked by farmers who made up the great majority of the population. Most belonged to calpulli, or communal groups, where families shared responsibility for fields. While land could be lost, seized for debts or tribute, the houses built upon it were considered untouchable. Even in hardship, a family's home remained theirs, a sacred space that could not be taken. This law reflected the Aztec respect for balance. While rulers and nobles demanded tribute, they also ensured that people retained shelter. Farmers, therefore, lived under heavy obligations, but with the security of a place to call their own. The home was more than wood and clay. It was the heart of family, the center of ritual, and the root of identity. To protect it, even amid economic strain, was to preserve the stability of society itself. Women could own property and businesses. Though Aztec society was strongly divided by gender, women held more independence than might be expected. They could inherit property, own land, and run businesses, especially in markets. Some became skilled artisans, producing textiles or pottery, while others oversaw trade stores filled with food, cloth, and jewelry. Widows often managed their households alone, retaining full legal control. Women also had the right to represent themselves in court, a rarity in many parts of the world at that time. This autonomy was balanced by expectations. Women were also guardians of the household, mothers and weavers of society's fabric. Yet their ability to own and manage property showed that they were not invisible in public life. They were essential participants in the economy and the community, their voices carrying weight in both household and market. Theirs was a role woven of both duty and strength. The emperor was called the Tlatoni, the Great Speaker. At the top of Aztec society stood the Tlatoni, the Great Speaker. More than a king, he was the voice of the gods on earth, chosen to lead both empire and ritual. His words carried the weight of law. His presence symbolized the unity of the people. Clad in feathered headdresses and garments of cotton and jewels, he embodied the splendor of the state. But his role was not luxury alone. The Tlatoni bore immense responsibility, guiding wars, overseeing tribute, and ensuring that sacrifices sustained the cosmos. His palace was both home and seat of governance, where councils gathered and emissaries from distant lands arrived. To the Aztecs, he was not just a ruler, but a living axis between humans and gods, the one whose speech bound together earth and sky. In his voice, the fate of the empire was spoken. He ruled with priests, nobles, and warriors beneath him. Though the emperor stood at the pinnacle, he did not rule alone. Beneath him stretched a vast hierarchy of priests, nobles, and warriors, each with specific duties. Priests guarded the calendar and the rituals, ensuring the gods were honored and the cosmos sustained. Nobles administered tribute, overseeing the flow of goods from conquered cities into Tenochtitlan. Warriors enforced the empire's will, fighting wars and capturing prisoners for sacrifice. Together, this structure bound the empire like a web, with the Tlatoni at its center. Councils advised him, and great decisions were debated, but his word ultimately prevailed. The balance of power ensured that no single part of society, religion, governance, or military stood apart. All worked together in sacred duty, their roles as intertwined as maize, beans, and squash in the fields. To rule the Aztecs was to hold in hand the strands of cosmos and state alike. Flower wars were battles fought purely for captives. Among the many kinds of warfare the Aztecs waged, the flower wars were the most ritualized. These were not campaigns for land or tribute, but battles fought with neighboring states to take captives for sacrifice. The encounters were arranged, almost ceremonial, with warriors on both sides knowing the purpose. To kill was less desirable than to capture, for prisoners fed the gods, and bravery was measured in living offerings. The name Flower Wars reflected this. The captives were like blossoms, gathered to adorn the altars of the gods. Despite their ritual nature, the battles were fierce, filled with blood and struggle. They reminded all participants of their role in the cosmic cycle. For the Aztecs, even war could be a form of devotion, a dance of life and death played out on fields that were as sacred as the steps of the temples themselves. Warfare was both sacred duty and political strategy. For the Aztecs, war was never only about conquest. It was sacred duty, demanded by the gods to feed the sun and sustain creation. Yet it was also political strategy, expanding the empire's reach and securing tribute from conquered peoples. Campaigns were carefully planned, with armies marching across vast territories to demand allegiance. Cities that resisted were crushed, their leaders slain or enslaved. Those that submitted were spared, though bound to provide goods and captives. In this way, war became both ritual and statecraft, binding religion and politics into one. Every warrior who marched carried not only weapons, but also the weight of cosmic responsibility. Victory was measured in tribute and prisoners, but also in the reassurance that the universe itself would continue another day. To fight was to serve the gods and to extend the empire's power, two sides of the same sacred coin. The Aztec Empire was an alliance of three powerful cities. Though remembered as one empire, the Aztecs ruled through what was known as the Triple Alliance. This pact joined three cities, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. Together, they rose to dominate the Valley of Mexico, expanding outward in campaigns that subdued hundreds of towns and kingdoms. Of the three, Tenochtitlan grew to be the most powerful, eventually overshadowing its partners, but the alliance remained the formal heart of the empire. Tribute from conquered peoples flowed into their markets, funding temples, palaces, and armies. This system allowed them to expand quickly, binding together diverse peoples under one overarching power. Yet beneath the unity, tensions lingered, as lesser allies bore heavy burdens of tribute, while the great cities reaped wealth and prestige. Still, for nearly a century, this alliance transformed the Aztecs from one city among many into masters of a sprawling empire, feared and revered across Mesoamerica. They conquered and ruled over hundreds of peoples. The Aztec Empire was not a single nation, but a mosaic of countless peoples bound together by conquest. From the Valley of Mexico, their armies spread outward, subduing towns, cities, and kingdoms across vast distances. Each conquest added new languages, foods, and traditions to the empire, yet also brought heavy demands of tribute and loyalty. Some peoples accepted Aztec rule, seeing advantage in alliance. Others resented the burden, waiting for moments of weakness to rebel. At its height, the empire controlled much of central Mexico, encompassing millions of people. To the Aztecs, this was not merely political power, but a reflection of cosmic order, their dominance proof that the gods favored them. Yet beneath the grandeur of empire pulsed a tension, a reminder that unity forged by conquest is fragile. The Aztec world was both dazzling and precarious, a great sun held aloft by the obedience of many. Conquered cities paid tribute in food, textiles, and jade. Once a city fell to Aztec power, its people were required to send tribute, regular payments that filled the markets and palaces of Tenochtitlan. Maize, beans, and chili peppers arrived in vast quantities, enough to feed the swelling capital. Tribute also came in cloth, painstakingly woven into fine garments, and in luxuries like jade, obsidian, and feathers. Each region contributed what it produced best: cotton from the hot lowlands, cacao from tropical forests, salt from the lakes. These streams of wealth sustained the empire, turning conquered peoples into the providers of its splendor. For subject cities, the tribute was heavy, a constant reminder of their subjugation. Yet for the Aztecs, it was proof of cosmic hierarchy, the strong receiving from the weak, the chosen receiving from the many. Each tribute delivery was not just payment, but a ritual acknowledgement of the empire's divine and earthly supremacy. Resistance was met with ruthless destruction. The Aztecs could be generous to cities that submitted, but those that resisted faced devastation. Entire towns were burned, leaders executed, and survivors enslaved or sacrificed. The ruins of rebel cities stood as grim warnings to others who might defy the empire. This ruthlessness was not cruelty for its own sake, it was policy, ensuring that rebellion would be feared more than submission. Yet even destruction carried ritual weight. Defeated warriors might be sacrificed, their hearts offered to the gods as tokens of victory. The spectacle of conquest was both political and religious, reinforcing the belief that the Aztecs held power not only by might, but by divine favor. To live within the empire was to live with a choice: obedience and survival, or defiance and annihilation. The memory of these destructions haunted subject peoples, shaping the fragile balance of loyalty and fear. The empire expanded faster than Rome at its height. In the span of less than a century, the Aztec Empire grew from a single city to a sprawling dominion of millions. Its rate of expansion was astonishing, faster, in fact, than that of Rome during its peak of conquest. Wars were constant, tribute flowed ceaselessly, and each year seemed to bring new lands under Aztec control. Unlike Rome, the Aztecs did not occupy with garrisons or colonies. Instead, they ruled indirectly, demanding tribute and sacrifices from local rulers while leaving many internal structures intact. This allowed rapid growth, but also left the empire vulnerable to unrest. The sheer speed of expansion was dazzling, but it was also unsustainable, built upon the relentless need for captives and wealth. In its meteoric rise, the Aztec Empire shone brilliantly, but like many empires that burn too brightly, its fall came almost as swiftly as its ascent. They called themselves Mexica, not Aztecs. The people we call Aztecs never used that name for themselves. They called themselves Mexica, a term tied to their identity, language, and sacred place in the Valley of Mexico. The word Aztec was later coined from Aztlan, the mythical homeland they believed they had left behind. To the Mexica, their name was a source of pride, marking them as chosen by their god Huitzilopochtli to build a great city on the lake's island. Even today, the name echoes in Mexico, a lasting reminder of their identity. The label Aztec, while common in history books, is in some ways an outsider's word, one that captures a mythic origin, but not the living identity of the people. To understand them truly is to see them not as Aztecs, but as the Mexica, heirs of a sacred journey and builders of one of history's most dazzling cities. The word Aztec means people from Atlan. The name Aztec comes from Aztlan, a legendary place of origin described as a land of water and white herons. Myths tell that the ancestors of the Mexica once lived there, guided by gods to leave their homeland and wander until they found the place where destiny awaited. Atlan's true location remains a mystery. Some believe it was a real place in northern Mexico or the American Southwest. Others see it as a purely mythical land, a paradise of beginnings that existed only in story. To be called Aztec, then, was to be marked as a people shaped by journey, exiles who had left their origin behind to create something new. In this way, the name itself captures a sense of longing and destiny, a reminder that their empire was born not of rooted stability, but of movement, faith, and a god's guiding hand. Their myth spoke of a homeland they left behind. Aztec stories tell of how their ancestors wandered for generations after leaving their homeland. They carried with them the memory of Aztlan, a place of abundance, and the promise of a new city ordained by the gods. Guided by visions and omens, they moved from place to place, enduring hardship and conflict until they reached the Valley of Mexico. Their journey was not only physical, but spiritual, a pilgrimage that transformed them into the chosen people of their god Huitzilopochtli. This story gave meaning to their empire. To build Tenochtitlan was not simply to claim land, but to fulfill a destiny written in myth. The memory of Aztlan remained alive in their songs and traditions, a reminder that their greatness was born of loss, endurance, and faith. They were wanderers who became conquerors, guided by the echo of a homeland always just beyond reach. They believed they were led by the god Huitzilopochtli. The wandering Mexica believed they traveled under the constant guidance of Huitzilopochtli, their patron god of the sun and war. His voice, carried through priests and visions, told them where to go and when to settle. At times, they faced rejection from stronger neighbors, forced to serve as mercenaries or to settle on poor land. Yet Huitzilopochtli promised them a destiny, a great city to be built where his sign would appear. This divine guidance shaped their sense of identity, convincing them that hardship was proof of their chosen status. To follow their god was to endure hunger, exile, and scorn, all stepping stones to eventual glory. When at last the sign was given and their city rose upon the lake, it was seen not as luck or chance, but as the fulfillment of a god's command, the end of a long divine journey. He commanded them to build their city where an eagle landed. The prophecy of Huitzilopochtli was clear. The Mexica would find their home where they saw an eagle perched upon a cactus, holding a serpent in its beak. After years of wandering, they came upon such a vision on a small island in Lake Texcoco. There, amid reeds and water, an eagle spread its wings against the sky, and the Mexica knew their journey had ended. It was here that they founded Tenochtitlan, transforming a swamp into the heart of a vast empire. The image of the eagle on the cactus became sacred, a symbol of divine favor and destiny fulfilled. It was more than a sign of place, it was proof that their God had chosen them, that their suffering and journey were not in vain. From this vision, an empire was born, rising like the eagle itself from water into sky. That eagle on a cactus still appears on Mexico's flag. The vision that guided the Mexica did not vanish with the fall of their empire. The eagle perched upon a cactus, serpent in its beak, remains alive as the central emblem of Mexico's flag. It is a symbol both ancient and enduring, a reminder of the prophecy that gave birth to Tenochtitlan. When modern Mexico sought its identity, it looked back to this image, tying the present to the mythic past. Today, millions see it daily, fluttering above cities, painted on coins, carried in ceremonies. It is a bridge between centuries, between the wandering Mexica who first saw an eagle above a lake, and the modern nation that still claims that vision as its heart. Through this symbol, the Aztec world has never truly disappeared. It lives on, a feathered echo of destiny, etched into the very fabric of Mexico itself. Quetzalcoatl was the feathered serpent god of wisdom. Among the Aztec gods, few were as revered as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. His form combined the earthbound serpent with the skyward Quetzal bird, symbolizing a union of land and heaven. Quetzalcoatl was a bringer of wisdom, credited with giving humanity maize, knowledge, and even the arts of writing and astronomy. Unlike the fierce gods of war, he was often remembered as a more benevolent figure, tied to creation and renewal. Myths told of his journeys, his conflicts, and even his self-sacrifice to help form the fifth sun. To see his image carved in stone or painted in codices was to see the echo of ancient wisdom itself. In later years, some Mexica even mistook the Spanish arrival as a sign of his prophesied return. Quetzalcoatl embodied both mystery and hope, a reminder that even among gods of battle and blood, there was also one who gave knowledge and life. Tlaloc brought rain, lightning, and floods. To the Aztecs, water was both blessing and threat, embodied in the storm god Tlaloc. He was lord of rains, lightning, and thunder, whose moods could bring either life-giving showers or devastating floods. Farmers prayed to him for gentle rains to nourish their fields of maize and beans. Yet they also feared his wrath, for too much water could ruin harvests, drowning crops and starving villages. Tlaloc was honored with offerings of jade, shells, and sometimes children, whose tears were thought to call down rain. His temples were painted in blue and green, adorned with fanged faces and goggle-like eyes, symbols of storm and sky. To live under his gaze was to live with constant awareness of nature's duality, its kindness and its fury. Tlaloc was both nurturer and destroyer, a reminder that survival depended on keeping balance with the unpredictable forces of water and sky. Totec wore skins to symbolize renewal. One of the most unsettling gods of the Aztec pantheon was Totec, the flayed lord. He was associated with spring, renewal, and the cycles of life and death. His priests dressed in the flayed skins of sacrificial victims, wearing them for days until the flesh decayed, symbolizing the shedding of the old and the birth of the new. Just as the earth sheds its dry husk to reveal fresh growth, so too did the rituals of Xipe Totec reflect renewal through sacrifice. It was both horrifying and vital, a god who reminded people that life grows from death, that fertility is born from decay. Farmers saw his symbolism in the sprouting of maize, priests in the rhythm of sacrifice. In his grim imagery lay a truth the Aztecs embraced, that the cycles of the natural world, growth, death, renewal, were inseparable, and that all life comes at a cost. Coyolxauhqui, the moon goddess, was dismembered in myth. In one of the most dramatic Aztec myths, Coyolxauhqui, the goddess of the moon, sought to stop the birth of her brother, Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun and war. Gathering her siblings, the stars, she attacked their mother. But Huitzilopochtli was born fully armed, shining with the power of the sun, and he struck Coyolxauhqui down. Her body was dismembered, her parts scattered across the mountainside. To the Aztecs, this myth explained the eternal struggle between the sun and the moon, day and night. The story was immortalized in carvings at the Great Temple, where her broken form was depicted in stone, a reminder of cosmic order and the triumph of the sun. To see the moon rise was to see Coyolxauhqui still shining, but always incomplete, always defeated in the endless battle against her radiant brother, the sun. Aztec myths blended gods, heroes, and cosmic cycles. For the Aztecs, mythology was not a distant set of stories, but the very fabric of reality. Gods walked among mortals, heroes became stars, and cosmic cycles played out in the daily rising of the sun. Myths told of the 5 suns, worlds born and destroyed, of gods who sacrificed themselves to keep creation alive, and of divine struggles that echoed human battles. These tales were not simply entertainment. They explained why the world was fragile, why sacrifice was necessary, why courage mattered. Every ritual, every festival, every war was tied to myth, an enactment of stories that had unfolded since time's beginning. To live as an Aztec was to live inside a mythic universe, where human actions were extensions of divine dramas. Their myths bound together heaven, earth, and underworld in a single story, told endlessly through ritual, poetry, and the stars above. Their religion saw life and death as 2 halves of one circle. Unlike many traditions that saw death as an end, the Aztecs understood it as part of a cycle. Life and death were 2 sides of the same turning wheel. Crops grew, withered, and returned. Suns rose, set, and rose again. People were born, died, and joined the cosmos in new forms. Sacrifice was not destruction, but transformation, the passing of life energy from one form to another. In this view, the boundaries between living and dead were porous. Ancestors could influence the living, gods demanded the lifeblood of mortals, and the deceased continued journeys in the underworld or across the sky. To the Aztecs, the fragility of life was not despairing, it was meaningful. Death gave life weight, and life gave death purpose. Together, they formed a circle without end, binding humans and gods in an eternal exchange of energy and devotion. The Spanish arrival was interpreted as the return of a god. When Spanish ships appeared on the horizon, many Aztecs believed it was the fulfillment of a prophecy. Stories told that the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, had departed long ago, but would one day return from the east. The Pelasgian strangers with their sails like great wings seemed to fit this tale. Moctezuma, the emperor, hesitated, unsure whether Hernan Cortés and his men were mortals or divine messengers. Gifts of gold and food were offered, attempts made to honor and appease them. This moment of uncertainty shaped the course of history, sowing hesitation where resistance might have stood. The arrival of the Spanish was not seen at first as conquest, but as a cosmic return, a story unfolding as foretold. In this way, myth shaped reality, and a prophecy became one of the most fateful misunderstandings in history. Cortés used old rivalries to topple the empire. The Aztec Empire was vast, but it was not united in loyalty. Many of the conquered peoples resented the heavy burdens of tribute and sacrifice demanded by Tenochtitlan. Hernan Cortés saw this division and exploited it, forging alliances with enemies of the Mexica. Most important were the Tlaxcalans, fierce warriors who had long resisted Aztec power. With their support, the Spanish gained tens of thousands of native allies, far more than the small number of Europeans who crossed the sea. When the final battles came, it was not Spaniards alone, but entire armies of indigenous rivals who marched on Tenochtitlan. The fall of the Aztec Empire was not only a clash of worlds, but also the culmination of simmering resentments within Mesoamerica itself. Cortés did not defeat the Mexica alone. He turned their enemies into allies, unraveling the empire from within. Smallpox ravaged the Aztecs before battles were even fought. As devastating as Spanish weapons were, disease proved far more destructive. Smallpox, carried across the ocean, spread rapidly through the Aztec world, striking down rulers, priests, and commoners alike. Entire families perished, villages emptied, and armies weakened before they could gather to fight. The epidemic killed tens of thousands, leaving Tenochtitlan vulnerable even before Cortés returned to besiege the city. For the Mexica, the disease seemed like a curse from the gods, an unseen weapon that spared no one. Traditional medicine could not stop it, and the loss of leaders in the midst of crisis created chaos. The collapse of population and morale brought by smallpox was as decisive as any battle. The empire, already strained, was undone by an enemy too small to see, but vast in its power, a silent invader that changed the course of history forever. The fall of Tenochtitlan was one of history's turning points. In 1521, after months of siege, famine, and disease, the great city of Tenochtitlan fell. Its canals ran red, its temples burned, its people slaughtered or enslaved. The city that had once dazzled with its shining temples and bustling markets lay in ruins. For the Spanish, it was a conquest. For the Mexica, it was an apocalypse, the end of their world. Yet, this fall was not only the collapse of one empire. It was the beginning of a new age in world history, as Europe and the Americas became entwined in ways never before imagined. The fall of Tenochtitlan marked the closing of one civilization's brilliance and the opening of centuries of colonial rule. It was a moment of both tragedy and transformation, a turning point whose echoes still resound in the identity of Mexico and the memory of the Aztec people. Spanish accounts described a city of glittering splendor. When the conquistadors first entered Tenochtitlan, their chroniclers struggled to find words. They described wide causeways lined with towers, marketplaces bursting with goods, and temples that glistened in the sunlight. Stone buildings rose above canals where canoes glided like gondolas, and gardens overflowed with flowers of every color. To Europeans accustomed to crowded, smoke-filled streets, the city seemed impossibly clean, ordered, and alive. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, who marched with Cortés, admitted that words could not capture its beauty, calling it a vision from a dream. To step into Tenochtitlan was to step into another world, one both dazzling and overwhelming. Its grandeur left even hardened soldiers speechless. Though much of it was destroyed, the memory of its glittering splendor survived in their writings, a glimpse of a city that shone with brilliance until the day it fell. They compared its canals to Venice. Tenochtitlan's canals struck the Spanish with wonder. They had seen Venice in Europe, the famous city built on water, and yet here, across the ocean, they found something even greater. Canoes filled the waterways, carrying food, flowers, and people from one district to another. Bridges crossed the canals, some of which could be raised to protect the city in times of war. The water reflected the gleam of temples and palaces, making the city shimmer as though it floated in the sky. To compare Tenochtitlan to Venice was high praise, but many Spaniards admitted it surpassed their memories of Europe. For the Mexica, the canals were not just transport but lifelines, feeding their markets with fish and linking their chinampa gardens to the city's heart. Venice may have been the pride of Europe, but in the 16th century its rival shone upon a lake in Mexico. The Aztecs had zoo gardens filled with exotic animals. Moctezuma's palace included vast gardens where animals from across Mesoamerica were gathered. There were jaguars, pumas, and wolves, brightly feathered birds from tropical forests, snakes coiled in stone pens, and fish swimming in carefully tended pools. Monkeys swung from trees, while strange creatures like axolotls swam in jars and channels. The collection was both a menagerie and a living tribute to the empire's reach. Every creature reflected the diversity of lands under Aztec control. Spanish observers were astounded, never having seen such a collection outside of legend. To the Mexica, these animals were not only curiosities but sacred beings tied to gods, omens, and rituals. The zoo was a living mirror of the empire's power, showing that even the creatures of jungle, mountain, and desert could be gathered into one place. It was less a pastime and more a vision of cosmic dominion, embodied in fur, feather, and scale. Moctezuma's menagerie stunned the conquistadors. Among the wonders of Tenochtitlan, none impressed the Spaniards more than Moctezuma's menagerie. Not only animals, but also human performers, acrobats, and keepers filled the palace grounds. There were aviaries where parrots, quetzals, and eagles shrieked and glittered, and tanks where crocodiles lurked in the water. The care was meticulous. Hundreds of attendants fed, bathed, and tended the creatures. To Europeans, such a spectacle was unimaginable. Kings might own hunting preserves, but no ruler they knew had gathered an entire empire's worth of animals into one place. The menagerie was more than collection, it was theater, a living display of the emperor's power and the reach of his rule. For the Mexica, Moctezuma's gardens were a reflection of the cosmos itself, filled with creatures that embodied gods and forces of nature. For the Spaniards, it was both a marvel and a sign of a world they had never dreamed. Their featherwork was considered more precious than gold. The Aztecs prized feathers with a passion greater than that for precious metals. Brilliant quetzal plumes, scarlet macaw feathers, and shimmering blues and yellows from tropical birds were woven into cloaks, shields, and headdresses. Craftsmen known as amanteca created feather mosaics of breathtaking beauty, arranging tiny plumes to form images of gods, flowers, and cosmic patterns. To Europeans, the artistry seemed miraculous, light as air, yet glowing with color no jewel could match. Gold was abundant, but feathers were rare, each plucked from distant lands or from birds kept in careful aviaries. A single quetzal plume could be worth more than a golden ornament. Feathers symbolized lightness, divinity, and the sky itself. To wear them was to borrow brilliance from the heavens. For the Mexica, feathers were treasures woven from air and sun, beauty more enduring than the weight of metal. The sunstone is still one of the world's most striking monuments. Often mistakenly called the Aztec calendar, the sunstone is one of the most iconic relics of the Mexica world. Carved from a single massive block of basalt over 12 feet across, it depicts the face of the sun god at its center, demanding blood to sustain the cosmos. Around him radiate the glyphs of time, the days, the ages, and the endless cycles of creation and destruction. It was not a simple calendar, but a vision of the universe itself, a map of cosmic order. Buried after the conquest, it was rediscovered centuries later, its carvings still sharp, its presence immense. Today, it rests in Mexico City, one of the most striking monuments of ancient art. To stand before it is to feel the weight of Aztec belief, the reminder that time itself was fragile, always one cycle away from ending. Many codices were burned, yet some survive today. When the Spanish conquered the Aztecs, they burned countless painted codices, seeing them as pagan and dangerous. In their flames perished histories, myths, and records of tribute, entire libraries of knowledge. If a few codices survived, carried away or hidden, preserving fragments of Aztec thought. These surviving works, such as the Codex Mendoza and the Florentine Codex, reveal dazzling details, the tribute owed by subject cities, the ceremonies of festivals, the very words and songs of the people. Their painted images remain vivid, their colors echoing the hands that made them centuries ago. Though only a fraction of what once existed remains, these codices allow us to glimpse the Aztec world as they saw it, not through the lens of conquest, but in their own voices and images. Each surviving page is a fragile miracle, a bridge across centuries of loss. Archaeologists continue to unearth temples beneath Mexico City. Modern Mexico City stands atop the ruins of Tenochtitlan, and beneath its streets, archaeologists continue to make discoveries. Temples, altars, offerings of jade and obsidian, and even human remains have been uncovered, preserved for centuries under layers of stone and soil. The most famous find is the Templo Mayor, once buried and now revealed, its carvings of gods and serpents still visible. Every excavation uncovers more about Aztec religion, art, and daily life, reminding the world that the empire's traces are not gone, only hidden. To walk the streets of Mexico City today is to walk upon an ancient capital, each step echoing above buried pyramids and plazas. The city of the Mexica is still there, sleeping beneath the modern one, waiting patiently as its secrets are revealed piece by piece, stone by stone, story by story. The skeletons found reveal sacrifice was real. For centuries, some doubted the scale of Aztec sacrifice described in Spanish accounts. But archaeology has confirmed it. Excavations have uncovered mass graves, altars stained with offerings, and skeletons with clear marks of ritual. Skulls were found on racks known as tzompantli, displays that honored the dead as gifts to the gods. Yet the remains also show diversity, not only warriors but women and children, sometimes buried with flowers and objects of beauty. These finds confirm that sacrifice was not myth but practice, woven deeply into religion and society. Still, the skeletons are not only echoes of death. They remind us of people who lived, ate, sang, and prayed before their final moments. In their bones, archaeologists find both evidence of ritual and traces of daily life, the proof that behind the grandeur of empire stood ordinary human beings with hopes and fears of their own. But they also reveal a people of music, food, and family. Though sacrifice looms large in memory, the bones and artifacts tell another story too. They reveal teeth worn down by maize, hands shaped by weaving, and remains of meals filled with beans, squash, and chili. Instruments like flutes and drums appear in graves, suggesting music was cherished in life and death. Toys, figurines, and household tools show the intimacy of family life, the laughter of children, the labor of parents, the rhythm of ordinary days. The Aztecs were not defined only by war and ritual, but by the same simple joys and struggles that shape all human lives. They ate together, sang, told stories, and cared for one another. Archaeology reveals not only sacrifice, but humanity, a people of warmth, creativity, and resilience. It is a reminder that even in the shadow of pyramids and conquest, the heart of the Aztec world was deeply, profoundly human. Aztec words still live in modern Spanish and English. Though the empire fell, its language still whispers in everyday life. Nahuatl, the tongue of the Mexica, gave the world words we still use. Tomato from tomatel, avocado from aguacatl, coyote from coyotl, and chocolate from zocolatl. In Spanish, dozens more remain, woven into place names, foods, and daily speech across Mexico. Even in English, we unknowingly echo Aztec voices when we speak of chili, tecao, or axolotls. Language endures where empires fade. Each word carries centuries of memory, a fragment of the Aztec world surviving in kitchens, markets, and conversations today. Though their temples lie in ruins, their speech lives on, embedded in the vocabulary of millions. Every time these words are spoken, they breathe a little life back into the Mexica, carrying their culture quietly forward across time and continents. Tomatoes, chocolate, and avocados were their gifts to the world. Many of the foods we treasure today were first cultivated in the lands of the Aztecs. Tomatoes, once small and wild, were grown into varieties that flavored sauces and stews. Avocados, rich and buttery, were harvested from groves and enjoyed with maize and chili. Chocolate, in its earliest form, was a sacred spiced drink, reserved for nobles and priests. These gifts, taken across the ocean, transformed global cuisines. Imagine Italy without tomatoes, France without chocolate, or modern kitchens without avocados. Their influence is everywhere, a legacy more enduring than empire. To the Mexica, these foods were more than nourishment. They were sacred, woven into myth, ritual, and identity. In every spoonful of salsa, every bite of guacamole, every piece of chocolate, the memory of the Aztec world lingers. Flavors born on the shores of Lake Texcoco, carried forward into kitchens and hearts across the crusty world. Mexico City still echoes with Aztec streets and foundations. Modern Mexico City, vast and bustling, is built directly atop Tenochtitlan. Beneath its plazas and cathedrals lie buried temples, causeways, and canals. Many streets still follow the old Aztec paths, invisible threads tying present to past. Archaeologists uncover fragments every year, carvings of gods, offerings of jade, walls of ancient stone. In some neighborhoods, canals of the old city still flow, remnants of the lake that once shimmered under the sun. To walk through Mexico City is to walk upon layers of time, each footstep echoing above Aztec foundations. Though the temples have crumbled, their presence lingers in the very bones of the city. The heartbeat of Tenochtitlan has not vanished. It pulses quietly beneath traffic and towers, a reminder that the modern metropolis is also an ancient capital, carrying the memory of the Mexica beneath its streets. The Day of the Dead blends Aztec and Catholic traditions. Each autumn, Mexico celebrates Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, when families honor ancestors with altars of flowers, candles, and food. Its roots stretch deep into Aztec belief. The Mexica held festivals for the dead, offering food and gifts to sustain them on their journey through the afterlife. Skulls, now made of sugar, once symbolized the cycle of life and death. When Catholic traditions of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day arrived, they blended with these older practices, creating a festival that is both ancient and new. Today, marigolds guide spirits home, incense curls in the air, and families gather to remember. The Day of the Dead is not sorrowful but celebratory, honoring death as part of life, a vision that echoes Aztec philosophy. It is a festival of memory and continuity, carrying ancient beliefs into the heart of modern culture. The Mexica saw themselves as people of the sun. For the Mexica, identity was tied to the sun itself. They believed they lived in the fifth sun, a fragile world destined one day to end. Their duty was to nourish the sun with offerings, to keep it strong enough to rise each dawn. Warriors who died in battle became companions of the sun, soaring with it across the sky. Even ordinary people played their part through rituals, prayers, and devotion. To be Mexica was to be a guardian of the cosmos, entrusted with keeping the universe in balance. This sense of cosmic responsibility infused every part of life, from farming to festivals. It gave their world both urgency and purpose. To live as a Mexica was not only to survive, but to sustain creation itself, to be, quite literally, a child of the sun. Their festivals still resonate in Mexican culture. Though centuries have passed, echoes of Aztec festivals can still be felt in Mexico's celebrations today. The great feasts of maize and rain, of fire and renewal, live on in processions, dances, and seasonal rituals that blend ancient and modern traditions. The new fire ceremony, once held every 52 years, finds its memory in fireworks and bonfires of festivals today. Offerings of flowers, food, and music still mark life's passages, just as they did in Tenochtitlan. Even the rhythms of music and dance, with drums and costumes, recall the sacred performances of old. These continuities remind us that culture does not vanish with conquest. It adapts, transforms, and survives. In every fiesta, in every shared meal or dance, the spirit of Mexica celebration flickers, weaving the past into the present, carrying the heart of Aztec joy and devotion into the life of modern Mexico. Modern Mexico honors them in murals and monuments. Walk through Mexico today, and you will see the Mexica honored everywhere, in murals that stretch across city walls, in statues rising in plazas, in museums filled with stone carvings and feathered relics. Artists like Diego Rivera painted vast scenes of Aztec life, reviving the memory of Tenochtitlan for new generations. Monuments commemorate Moctezuma, Mizahualcoyotl, and countless unnamed warriors and farmers who shaped the past. These tributes are not only history but identity, affirmations that the roots of Mexico run deep into the Mexica world. To honor them is to acknowledge not only their empire and temples, but their language, food, and vision of life. Modern Mexico does not forget the Mexica. It carries them forward in stone, color, and song, ensuring that their legacy remains visible, powerful, and alive in the present. The Aztec eagle still soars on the nation's flag. At the center of Mexico's flag, an eagle perches on a cactus, serpent in its beak, the very image that guided the Mexica to found Tenochtitlan. This ancient vision has become the enduring symbol of a nation, seen on coins, schools, and public buildings. For the Mexica, it was destiny fulfilled, the sign of divine favor. For modern Mexico, it is heritage-made national identity, a unifying emblem across centuries. To raise the flag is to raise the memory of the Lake Island, where an eagle once landed, where a people built a shining city on water. The emblem ties past and present together, reminding all who see it that Mexico's story began long before conquest, in a vision of sky, earth, and feather. The eagle still soars, as alive today as it was when the Mexica first lifted their eyes to the sky. Their legacy is written in Mexico's very name. The very name, Mexico, is a living legacy of the Mexica. Derived from their own name for themselves, it carries their identity across centuries. Every time the country is named, it speaks of the people who once built Tenochtitlan, who saw themselves as chosen by the sun. The persistence of this name is remarkable, surviving conquest, colonization, and transformation into a modern nation. It shows how deeply their presence endures, not only in monuments or ruins, but in the daily word used to describe a land and its people. To call the nation Mexico is to honor the Mexica, to acknowledge their central place in its story. Their name, once spoken in temples and markets, now echoes in schools, songs, and international gatherings. A reminder that the Aztec world never vanished, but still lives in the very identity of the country itself. The spirit of the Aztecs still lives in Mexico today. Though centuries have passed since the fall of Tenochtitlan, the spirit of the Mexica continues to shape Mexico. It is in the foods that nourish daily life: maize, chili, chocolate. It is in the language, in Nahuatl words whispered through markets and kitchens. It is in festivals of flowers and fire, in music, in poetry, in art. It is in the eagle on the flag, the name of the nation, and the pride of people who carry this heritage. The Aztec Empire may have crumbled, but its memory thrives, not as ruins alone, but as living culture. The Mexica are not only figures of the past. They are ancestors whose spirit flows into the present, guiding Mexico like the eagle once guided their forebears. Their story is not over. It continues, alive in the heartbeat of a nation that still carries their flame. And so, our journey through the world of the Mexica drifts to its close. We have walked their great city of Tenochtitlan, where temples rose from the waters and markets buzzed with life. We have sat beside their fires, listened to their poetry, and watched their warriors don feathers and jaguar skins beneath the rising sun. We have seen their gods in storm and serpent, their devotion in offerings of flowers and blood, their artistry in feathers, stone, and song. Though centuries have passed, their spirit lingers in the words we speak, the foods we savor, and the eagle that still spreads its wings upon the flag of Mexico. The Aztecs may have fallen, but they have not vanished. They live on in memory, in culture, and in the heartbeat of a nation that still carries their name. If you enjoyed this quiet journey into the past, I invite you to like and subscribe, or share one of your favorite Aztec facts in the comments below. It helps the channel grow, and it lets us keep bringing you these gentle stories of history. But for now, let the torches fade, let the sound of drums fall silent, and allow the centuries to drift away like mist across the lake. Rest easy, knowing the ancient world will be here to greet you again another night. Good night, and sweet dreams.